Welcome to POTUS 2017, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. A troubled launch at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. To date, after less than a month, the setbacks include President Trump's immigration ban losing in the courts, embarrassing leaks about his phone calls with foreign leaders, an internal investigation of such leaks that reportedly has White House staffers at odds and under suspicion, with some resorting to an app that instantly erases their messages. His nominee for Labor Secretary, Andrew Pudzer, is reportedly planning to withdraw, abuse allegations and financial entanglements therefore causing that. And then there is White House advisor Kellyanne Conway in hot water for flogging Ivanka Trump's product line. This after the president assailed Nordstrom for dropping his daughter's products. And then, of course, the most serious development, Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, forced to quit after the truth came out that before Trump was sworn in, Flynn talked with the Russian ambassador about the sanctions imposed by President Obama, sanctions to punish Moscow for hacking the Democrats to influence the November election. And there's more palace intrigue. Turns out the president knew the truth about Flynn for weeks, but apparently didn't tell Vice President Pence, who's the one who went public defending Flynn. We're also learning via the New York Times from a trove of FBI wiretaps that Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with high Russian intelligence during the 2016 campaign. No election collusion reported, though. Both parties are calling for investigations. So is this a perfect political storm, a Watergate that will sink the Trump presidency? Doubtful, and not something Trump opponents are counting on. For activists resisting Trump and the GOP policy agenda, it is a long battle with many tactics. Today, we cover the resistance and we ask which tactics actually work. And later in the program, in our evidence-based politics segment, we examine a study of the Dodd-Frank legislation to see if it's been stifling growth or preventing another Wall Street meltdown, or both. Trump's already modifying the bill. First, though, resisting Trump. What works? Street protests, lobbying lawmakers, liberals running for office at the local, state, and national levels. To begin, via Skype from Brooklyn, L.A. Kauffman, author of Direct Action, Protest, and the Reinvention of the American Revolution. She coordinated the massive February 2003 anti-Iraq war protest in New York City. And here in the studio, Justin Krebs, lead campaign director of MoveOn.org's Civic Action Campaign. He also wrote the book, Blue in a Red State, The Survival Guide to Life in the Real America. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
L.A. Kauffman, take us back to 2003. People who were around New York City then will remember like 1 million people in the streets on the east side, a lot of complaints about being penned in by the police, not being able to congregate freely or march, and yet the war started anyway. So how do you look back on that movement and its success?
Right, that was quite an extraordinary time. It still stands as the largest single day of protest ever in world history. There were, as you say, at least 1 million people on the streets in New York City and people on every continent around the world. And as you say, it was both this extraordinary outpouring of dissent and it seemed to have no impact whatsoever. People have in their minds this model of mass mobilizations like the 1963 March on Washington and kind of think that there's some automatic reaction between bringing large numbers in the streets and making policy change. And the Iraq War was a case where that didn't happen at all. Arguably, the work that was done to bring people together had lasting effects. And I think when you look at a mobilization like the Women's March that happened recently, it's through the frame of movement building that its significance over the long term is going to be greatest.
Justin, is it something that the Move On movement looks back on now, the 2003 mobilization or anything having to do with the Iraq War before or during the war?
You know, I remember the march in February 2013, so thanks for organizing it, LA. I was there. And Move On was obviously a large anti-war group at a time where there weren't a lot of online groups, and that was the space we held. One of the differences between then and now that I see is that we saw the energy around the Women's March, and that was then spiked by the Women's March, immediately turning into directed actions at members of Congress. The protest outside office, flooding phone calls, in a way that did not quite link as successfully in 2003. Or the impact I think we see is even more effective. You see Democratic senators had been voting for some of Trump's nominees and then stopped voting for his nominees. And now with today's news that there's some Republicans going against the Secretary of Labor nominee, you actually see some defeats. Whereas at the Iraq War vote, a significant number of Democrats voted for the authorization to use military force, didn't have the footing to stop it. So I think both mobilizations, LA is right, is about movement building, and then about also that next step of how do you channel and funnel that energy. And if you can find the levers of power that can actually stop a war or stop a cabinet member or stop an executive order, then you put that muscle of the movement behind it.
Yeah, and of course, LA, you mentioned the 1963 March on Washington, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech march. That was not an isolated event. The civil rights movement had been going on with marches and sit-ins and all kinds of nonviolent, civil disobedience and resistance through the 1950s and through the first half of the 1960s before those major pieces of civil rights legislation was passed. Obviously, as I know you know, things are so different now, though. Even from 2003, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, social media in general. So how different do you see the tools for the anti-Trump resistance movement today to be, and does it work more for them or more against them, because both sides can use those tools?
Right. I mean, I think the communications tools are much better than they were in 2003 or 1963. But a lot of the other tools, the tools of protest, remain the same. And what strikes me about this moment is how people are using the whole array of tactics right now. We see people doing lobbying and doing sit-ins and civil disobedience. People are operating in multiple arenas with multiple tactics. The resistance movement is sprawling and decentralized, facilitated in part by those exact methods of communication that you mentioned. But that gives it a resilience that I think is very encouraging.
Are you surprised, LA, that the Trump resistance movement has developed the intensity that it has so quickly? I mean, looking back, maybe the rest of the world forgets, but with what was going on in Iraq and Abu Ghraib and warrantless wiretapping and all those other things, Bush and Cheney were like the devils incarnate, to people on the other side, and yet it didn't produce the kind of intensity that I think we're seeing now.
You're right. You're right. The mood is different, and sometimes there's something ineffable about organizing. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why people feel much more moved to action at one time than they do to another. I mean, I think even after Trump's election, the period right after the election, the protests I went to quite a few, and they were frankly small. Maybe 10,000 at the most. And part of what happened with the moment of the Women's March that was so magical was it was like the spell of fear and reluctance and discouragement was broken, and people felt empowered to act in this whole range of powerful ways.
Is that how you see it, Justin?
I remember being depressed on Inauguration Day and then being inspired the day after and thinking the following Monday, who thought that I could go into the first Monday of the Trump administration feeling uplifted? But what we saw around the world and how we quickly saw many groups tapping into that energy and activist organizers, regular people turning into activists, being inspired by that was transformative. And we've seen the effect since.
So, LA, does history suggest that this movement will peter out and it'll be left to the establishment Democrats to do whatever work they can do as the minority in Congress? Or does history suggest that something else may continue to be more effective from outside?
Right. Well, history hasn't seen a conjuncture quite like this one before, so I'm reluctant to make too many predictions. But one contrast between now, for instance, and when Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, he took office after a period of crisis and decline among grassroots movements of the left, whereas Trump has taken office after a period where, beginning with Occupy, moving on to Black Lives Matter, the Standing Rock Sioux protests, there's been a growth of organizing and activism for years now, and pre-existing networks and resources that people are drawing on. I think people have a pretty good understanding that this isn't going to be a quick process and are girding themselves for a long period of organizing. So I don't think it's going to fade away quickly.
L.A. Kauffman, thank you very much for joining us. So Justin Krebs, how do you see the long-term strategy going forward? You're not going to be able to get hundreds of thousands of people into the streets every week. There aren't going to be spontaneous outbursts very many times like we saw at the airports on the night the travel ban was announced. So what do you see going forward?
Sure. Well, the spontaneity and the size so far has been inspirational. And sadly, I wouldn't rule out more spontaneous moments like that, depending on how extreme and how far-reaching the Trump administration tries to be. But our work is to make sure that anybody in their lives can become an active citizen and an activist. And that means you shouldn't have to be at meetings every day. These things should be able to be opportunities that you find as meet you. So we've been doing weekly training calls with Indivisible, Working Families Party, other groups on Sunday nights. We've been doing weekly Tuesday events to create a regularity and a routine. The airport protests, a rally at Battery Park City, these things happen in addition to this other work. But if we can create some structures for people to continue with. And then the other side of it is that as depressing and upsetting and frightening as the work is, you also have to find the joy in the victories and successes. And we're seeing that. And that's why the feeling of community that comes from these rallies and these gatherings, the making sure we do work that is not just expressing outrage, but is actually winning fights nationally, but also locally and state, are going to keep people motivated.
Joining us now as well via Skype from Washington, D.C., Gonzalo Martínez de Vedia, co-author of Indivisible, A Practical Guide for Resisting the Trump Agenda. Indivisible is also a new movement on the left, boasting 7,000 groups in 50 states. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I should say for the record that this is not the same Indivisible as a radio show that I'm also involved with on another medium, which has a nonpartisan mission and is a whole different thing. But tell us about Indivisible. How are you trying to organize people similarly and different from Move On?
Sure. So Indivisible was a Google document that went up online shortly after the election that essentially laid out some tactics that might be useful in this particular political moment. A lot of the authors who created the guide were former congressional staffers or progressive activists like myself who remembered the year 2009 and what the Tea Party was able to do when Obama happened to have not only the mandate that he did, but a super majority in Congress. And despite having all of that support at the polls, a vocal minority was able to really hijack the national conversation and take the wheels out of the Obama agenda in many ways. So the guide suggests that there are two tactics that we can take out of the Tea Party handbook and effectively use to hopefully slow down and stop, in some cases, the Trump agenda.
And what are those main tactics?
Well, for one thing, they stayed local. So as astounding as it has been for me here in D.C. to see the nation descend upon us for the Women's March, and as proud as I've been as a New Yorker to see the protests at the airports, part of the real long-haul work against the Trump agenda is going to happen in individual congressional districts. And that's what the Tea Party did very effectively. They didn't waste any time contacting folks who really didn't have any accountability to them. They went straight for their individual members of Congress in their home districts, on their home turf, in their district offices, and they changed the national conversation.
And let me play a video, a very short clip of a sort of Tea Party reminiscent moment at a recent town hall meeting of Congressman Jason Chaffetz in Utah. This time, though, it's liberals and Democrats who showed up en masse. Watch.
You reassure the people saying of an investigation. I will when there is an allegation of wrongdoing. You use Title 18, Section 208 to assert that the president is exempt of conflicts of interest, but you admit he is not exempt of the emoluments clause. The allegations have been made. Congressman Cummings asked you to begin the investigation. The lawsuits have been filed. You acknowledged that. I'm asking you today to explain what your timeline is to uphold your word, or why there is a reluctance to do so.
So, Gonzalo, is that the same thing as we saw with the Tea Party back at the beginning of Obama?
I would argue that it's even grander.
How would you argue
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. I mean, it's definitely the same strategy, and something that is really going to play in our favor going forward is to remember that the Tea Party really was a vocal minority. In this case, we might just be a vocal majority that's using these tactics and holding Congress accountable.
So, Justin, how do Move On's tactics differ from Indivisible's? We've been hearing a little bit of an introduction to what they're doing, and it sounds like it involves a fair amount of in-person kind of contact. People who know Move On probably know it from getting emails all the time.
Probably.
So how different are the two approaches, and do they coordinate?
Move On and Indivisible, I would argue, have basically the same theory of change. And that's why we're working together. The Sunday Call, which you can find out at moveon.org/ready-to-resist, is co-hosted by Move On, Indivisible, and other groups. And right now, that theory of change is people flooding congressional offices with phone calls, showing up in person, making the case to their representatives, are gonna change the story, change the narrative, show the strength that we are the majority and that we won't be silent, and are gonna see some real victories. And we've been seeing it already on healthcare, where the Republicans have twice missed their own deadline to repeal Obamacare, their signature goal, right? And we're going to see it on more and more issues moving forward. And that's why it's great that Move On, Indivisible, and so many groups are thrown in on next week's resistance recess, the first congressional recess of the Trump administration. And what you just saw at Jason Chaffetz's town hall is going to be repeated at every congressional office that is brave enough to have a town hall. And where they're too scared to have a town hall, we're going to bring the town hall to them.
And that's right now, right, Gonzalo? There's a moment for this town hall confluence because there's a Washington's, or I should say President's Week recess where a lot of members of Congress who do hold town halls hold them. So this moment is particularly of the moment. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're headed into a congressional recess, and that's when folks here on the Hill are going to have to go home and answer to their constituents. And I think it'll be a really telling moment.
So how do you get people, Justin, who aren't going to hold town hall meetings to either hold them, and we've certainly seen this going on in the New York City area with lists of members who are holding town hall meetings and those who are not, particularly Republican members who are not, because those are obviously the ones who progressives want to show up and confront. And if they don't hold town hall meetings, is there a way to accomplish the same goal, which I'm guessing is a media goal more than a kind of persuade them of the rightness of your cause goal? True?
It's persuade them of the force of the majority. Whether or not they agree we're right, they need to know they'll be held accountable throughout their term and at the next election. They might not agree with us, but they need to know that there will be consequences if they don't listen to their constituents. So how do we do it?
But let me follow up on that,
sure.
because you're not necessarily the majority of the constituents in their districts. If they're Republicans elected in Republican districts, then it's probably that most of their people voted for Trump, and most of their people don't share the same policy goals that that you do. So why would, each congressional district in the country is about 700,000 people. So if you get even a couple of thousand out to a constituents' town hall meeting, why does that really change their political calculus?
Well, maybe a majority voted for Trump or voted for the Republican member of Congress, but a majority did not vote to have health care stripped away from tens of millions of people. So you look at an issue like that, and when you show up at that town hall meeting and say, Congressmember so-and-so, will you commit to not taking away my health care? And they refuse to make that commitment, you're going to suddenly discover a lot of Republicans, a lot of Trump voters who now disagree with that representative.
Gonzalo, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. As people look across the map, they may think that, Indivisible and other progressive groups might be most concentrated in the coastal areas or in the urban areas. The reality of it is that this is just a tool that can be applied to put political pressure on members of Congress from folks of any political persuasion. There might have still been a little bit of mystery about the Trump agenda before the election because of his antics and his sort of unorthodox approach. But there is no secret about the cabinet that he is putting together and some of the damage that that's going to do to Americans of all political backgrounds. So even in the red areas, even in a place like Utah, in the video that we saw, there might be folks using indivisible tactics that come from unpredictable places.
And by the way, we mentioned at the beginning of the show that the Labor Secretary nominee, Andrew Pudzer, was reported to be close to withdrawing. I'm now seeing multiple media sources saying that he has, in fact, withdrawn. So that's the first cabinet member defeat. Still a good record for the Trump administration, numbers-wise, for getting many controversial people through. Let me ask you, Gonzalo, about the risk of blowback against the protest movement. I've read that there's this sort of Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller playbook, which says do things or sound like you're being a little extreme, and then that's going to draw in the left to lose their minds, and they're going to look to middle America more extreme than you are. So is it something that you have to guard against if protest is a big strategy for fighting Trump?
We are very clear from the very beginning of the guide that the pages that we're taking out of the Tea Party playbook are the strategic ones about being local and staying defensive. That does not mean that we have to replicate some of what we saw with the Tea Party in terms of the use of violence or more extreme tactics. We don't need to do that because we're in the majority. So absolutely, in any sprawling movement, there will always be exceptions to the rule, but our mainstream supporters and the folks that have used the guide have largely adhered to principles of nonviolence and principles that honor the progressive place from where this is coming.
How about the Berkeley incident, where that provocative Breitbart editor was doing an appearance and it wound up getting shut down really for his safety after some people in a big protest that was mostly peaceful got violent. And there was dissension, I think, between that large majority of peaceful protesters and the so-called black bloc, people wearing black, anarchists, who did come to cause violent disruption. How do you deal in the movement with that fringe?
Well, we, like Indivisible, move on only recruits to events and hosts events that are committed to peaceful, nonviolent, legal protest, for many of the same reasons that you just heard. And there are many ways that we can protest. There are many ways we can gather. Not every gathering, by the way, is a protest. We can also rally what we're for. And I think the Women's March did an amazing job of that. There wasn't a single arrest in Washington on a day of 1 million people gathered, far dwarfing the inauguration. Now, can you control what every element will do? No, but principles of nonviolent, peaceful resistance were at the center of the Women's March. They're at the center of the events that we're recruiting for. And that kind of unity of community and unity through love and unity through a forward movement is all we can do. And there will be occasions of somebody else doing something else, but that's not what we're going to recruit for or call for.
Yeah. Gonzalo, a little more on that same question. And do people in the peaceful anti-Trump movement need to denounce clearly and forcefully whatever fringes of the movement are causing violence, in the same way that you call on conservatives and populists to clearly denounce people on the alt-right who are clearly racist and neo-Nazi?
You know, I'll leave that for each individual community that is using Indivisible as one of their tools to decide how to moderate and sort of relate to each other as they begin to link arms. You know, one of the things we know is that it's a lot easier to stand in opposition than to put together a forward-looking vision. And that might be the silver lining of this political moment, is that we actually do not have to work across some of the ideological gaps within the resistance. We just have to stand together and say no. And that's a message that we can send in a nonviolent way that includes people of all backgrounds that are being affected by this, and be just as effective.
Is that a good enough answer? Is that a good enough answer for, you know, the non-protesting masses out there who are trying to figure out what to think? To say, oh, we just need to stand together. I don't need to denounce clearly the violent fringe. Every local group can decide for themselves.
I'm hesitant to speak to, you know, the situation of any individual part of the country that might have to deal with that. As a longtime activist, I know that it's always difficult to know who's coming to a march, who's showing up at a town hall, and really what banner they're doing that under. But we do try to offer one tool and one space where violence is not encouraged or really permitted at all, and hope that will be a big enough tent that folks will be able to enter it without having to cause bigger problems.
We just have a minute left. Is February 25th, next Saturday, the next big day to watch? I saw Bernie Sanders on television announce February 25th as the next big day of protest.
It's going to be all week. From the 18th to the 26th, Resistance Recess is fully on, and it involves events being organized by Move On, by Indivisible, by plenty of partner groups, by labor unions, by environmental groups, by senators, by local groups. If you check out resistancerecess.com, you'll find events all over the country, peaceful, legal, nonviolent events that, by the way, are not only going to focus on Republicans and make them realize that they need to step back, also focus on Democrats and stiffen their spines for the fight ahead.
So in our last few seconds, Gonzalo, you want to pick up on that? Does your group plan to organize? Are you already organizing at Democratic members' town halls? And are they anything other than pep rallies when you do?
Absolutely. Much more than just a pat on the back for Democrats. Right now, they have a lot of sway over how much they do or don't work with the Trump agenda. And we've already heard troubling signals that there might be a willingness to cut deals with what we consider to be a racist, misogynist, xenophobic agenda. So as far as our champions are staying strong on the Hill, they absolutely will be celebrations of their work, and where people are looking to compromise their values, that there might be some accountability from the Indivisible groups.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us.
Great, thank you.
And audience, those of you who are waiting for a discussion on Dodd-Frank today, unfortunately we had to postpone that at the last minute. We'll do that on a future show. And that's POTUS 2017 for today. We're here each week at this hour, keeping watch on the Oval Office and pouring cold hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. All this news is developing at a shocking pace. Don't forget to breathe. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.